Right. Okay. Well, good evening, everyone. For those of you who don't know me, I am um, the Vice Chair and Treasurer of the Select School Libraries Group. And welcome to our latest webinar on making sense of the National Year of Reading. I'm a chartered librarian. I've been working in school libraries for over 30 years, a long time. And I now do all sorts of different freelance work. I go into libraries, I do stock audits, I do training like this, and my latest ventures have been writing, which is really exciting. So I happen to think that being a school librarian is one of the best jobs in the world. I really, really do. If you talk to my family, friends, they will tell you I am obsessed with school libraries. You know, I'm obsessed with libraries anyway, but particularly school libraries, and I love books and I love reading, and it's always been sort of part of my world. Now, these are exciting times for school libraries, I have to admit. Last year we had the announcement that primary schools were going to have all primary schools libraries by 2030. We then had the announcement of the National Year of Reading. And following that, there was this pledge of money to state secondary schools to purchase reading for pleasure resources supported to support this initiative. But we are only in, what is it, the second week of February. So we've only a few weeks into the year, I guess a month or so since we all went back to school. And like a lot of you, I am already feeling overwhelmed with the National Year of Reading. There is a lot of noise out there. And because there's all this noise and emails and wherever you look, if you're in that library world bubble, it's coming at you from all sides. You've got this sense of FOMO that you're missing out, and that if you don't do something now, you've got to do something now, you'll miss the boat. So the first thing I want to say to all of you is it's a year of the National Year of Reading. Okay, you don't have to do everything in the first month or two. We've got a whole year of this. And this webinar, I hope, is going to reassure you and help you reframe your existing work rather than send you off to well, reinvent. I was going to say reinvent, and basically this is what you'd end up doing. You'd reinvent things, or you might come up with new ideas. But I want to leave you with that sense of reassurance and maybe help some of you that are feeling overwhelmed by all this. This is the third National Year of Reading in my career. So this is not a new idea. So I've survived the other two, so I'm fairly certain I'm going to survive this one. Now, you are already leading Reading for Pleasure in your schools. So basically, you are already delivering those National Year of Reading initiatives every single day. Right? So what the National Year of Reading gives us isn't extra initiatives, not if we don't want it to, it gives us opportunities. Right. This is what you've got to think about. We've now got opportunities to talk about what we do because we have a common language. We now have that national narrative. Alongside this, we are now visible. We've got that visibility, and we've got permission to talk about what we're doing. So those teachers, whenever you try to get them pulled into library activities, and they think, oh, it's that librarian coming down the corridor, I'm going to disappear into my classroom. You've got permission to grab them and to drag them into library activities because it's the National Year of Reading and everybody should be involved. Now, reading for pleasure is often not seen as serious. And I've met this on a lot of occasions, and I think it's because we call it pleasure. Because shouldn't reading in schools, it should all be about learning and improving. And the problem with reading for pleasure is you can't really measure it. You can measure when children get better at reading, when they increase their reading levels, that can be measured. But how do you measure the amount of pleasure somebody is getting from reading a book? You just can't, can you? And unfortunately, in our environments we work in, if you can't measure and evaluate something, it often doesn't count. But now we can talk about reading for pleasure within the parameters of the National Year of Reading. So basically, you need to reframe what you do and make connections, very strong connections, between your activities and the National Year of Reading, because this will make your impact visible. Now, the National Year of Reading is not asking school librarians to suddenly do something new. I've not read that anywhere. Everything that's come up about the National Year of Reading, I'm thinking, yeah, we do that. Yeah, that's what librarians do. We've been doing that for years, okay? So really what this is doing is recognising the work you've done for years. Your senior management team may not acknowledge this, that what you are doing is already aligned with the National Year of Reading, because they may not see the work you do as being um, engaging students with reading, reading for pleasure. You know, let's face it, a lot of senior management don't really know what's going on in the library. A lot of teachers don't come to that unless they actually interact with you. So you need to make sure you reframe that work very clearly and very strategically. Now, what I'm going to do in this evening, in this webinar, is I want to go through a framework um, that begins with naming what you already do through to whole school ownership. So you're moving from the familiar through to the strategic. Now, I'm going to give you some ideas and things, but you can stop at any point in this framework. There's no rule that says you have to do whole school activities, whole school ownership across every, all stakeholder groups for the National Year of Reading. Um, because you've all got individual circumstances. I've always said that whenever I've delivered any training on, how to increase engagement with students or all, all sorts of things that we do. Every time I've done training, I've said, these are suggestions. You only do what you are able to do within your circumstances. You know, you may not have the support to do shared ownership across the school. Hopefully you'll get more support this year because of the National Year of Reading, but you may not. So work with what you've got. Budgets, that's another big thing, isn't it? You cannot promote reading for pleasure if you don't have the books that students want to read. Now, I know we're all meant to be getting this £1,400. I think it's next year's budget will be sort of after April, but I've already heard some librarians say that it's unlikely they'll get it. Right? But £1,400 feels like a lot of money, but we know how much books cost, and that doesn't go very far, really, does it? Especially if you've had little or no budget for year after year after year. That's a lot of filling in you've got to do to provide a collection that's going to attract your students. So do what you can with what you've got. The important thing is, though, the really important thing, and I can't stress this enough, do not measure yourself against what others are doing. Right? This goes for social media. People tell us that all the time, don't they? Don't measure your lives by what you see on social media. The same goes for librarians, school librarians. You know, people post about what they're doing in their library, this, that, and the other. It, don't look at this and think, oh, I'm not doing any of that. I'm not, I'm inadequate. You're not. You're doing a brilliant job in your circumstances. So do not measure yourself against others. That's so important. Okay. You'll just get, oh, how didn't mean to do that. There we go. So the first stage in this is to rebadge what already exists. The very first thing you need to do. Now, this is not cheating. I know it might feel a little bit like cheating. You think, oh, but I already do these activities, I already produce book lists and stuff, surely I've got to do something new for the National Year of Reading. No, you don't. This is what everyone else is doing, trust me. Every single organisation or business connected in any way whatsoever with school libraries, with books, with reading, with literacy, they are renaming their usual activities and promoting them as supporting the National Year of Reading. I subscribe to a lot of emails, and I do this because I like to keep up to date with what's happening, keep up to date with new research, resources, and some of this I feed into the SLG newsletter, and I share on various school librarian forums, and also it's my own CPD. You know, I need to keep up to date with professional developments. All of them are now promoting National Year of Reading resources. But if you actually look at what they're promoting, it's the same resources as they had previously. Um, I get an email from the British Library about their resources and news and events that run, and I noticed their latest email. It said, investigate our National Year of Reading resources. When I clicked through, the resources were exactly the same as they've always been. Now, the British Library resources are amazing. If you've not had a look at them, please do, because although there's some in person, there's a lot of online stuff, and they link to all sorts of curriculum areas like history and cultural studies and PSHE in English and masses of stuff. But these are the same resources that they had last year, and I've no doubt they'll have the same resources if they're still being used and they're not replaced next year, but they just won't be calling them National Year Reading Resources. Okay, and this is why you are feeling overwhelmed, because everybody seems to be doing new stuff for the National Year of Reading. Okay, so start with what you already do. Do you do reading challenges? Most of what I'm mentioning you will do in some form or another. You might not do all of them, but I bet you if I took a poll amongst the people here, and I would, hands up if you do a reading challenge, hands up if you have a book group. For whatever I mention, somebody will put their hands up. So reading challenges, book groups, book lists, library displays. If you've got events organised for World Book Day, like author visits and things, none of these are new. You're already doing them. Just add add that National Year of Reading logo to your list, to your slides on presentations that you use in lessons. You can see here I've done it on this school libraries group logo, and I've got the Go All In logo. So I've linked this with the National Year of Reading. Obviously we are talking about it, and this is a webinar I've created just to talk about the National Year of Reading. But other people will be doing the webinars that they do all the time, and they'll put the Go All In symbol on there. Okay, and it's very easy to find. You can just do a screenshot and drop it in. Okay. Um, and then if you want to use the same resources next year, just remove that logo, and you've still got your resources you can use. Um, a good example is Lucas Maxwell, who does amazing things with these students in his library, and he produces a newsletter with telling you all about this stuff. He's come up with a book challenge called 6 for 26, which I think is quite catchy actually. And if you think about it, six books isn't a lot to read, is it? 6 for 26 feels quite doable for a lot of students. But he said, this is my book challenge for the National Year of Reading. Now, knowing Lucas, he would have done a book challenge anyway, because that's what he does with his students. But he's linked it with the National Year of Reading. So you need to do that, a simple shift in your thinking and how you name things. Now, this, as I said, will give you a shared language with your senior management team. They will be aware of this initiative. I don't know if any of you have been approached by them yet and asked, what are you doing? But there's no way they're not going to be aware of this initiative. Right? So the focus here on this part of the framework is to make your existing reading for pleasure work visible without adding any extra workload. That's the important thing. But just by putting that logo, you're making it invisible and it's no extra workload. And basically, if it's not named, it's not seen. So if you only do one thing, then do this. Right, I've scrolled rather than clicked, sorry there. Um, right, the next step in the framework, so your next mission, if you choose to accept it, is to extend your everyday practice with small tweaks. So again, we're not looking at new initiatives that take up a lot of time and energy to organise. We're basically looking at low energy additions that will deepen the impact without increasing your workload. Because let's face it, we're all busy. We don't really need new initiatives on top of what we're doing. So really, these are small changes. I've just realised I need to. There we go. Small changes to make reading for pleasure feel intentional. So that reading for pleasure is embedded in your work rather than bolted on. So it's not like, oh yeah, we've got 5 minutes left of the lesson. Let's read. Let's get your books out and read. It needs to be actually part of the lesson. Okay. And the focus here is on choice and enjoyment for students. And this also will increase your visibility. So everything you do along this framework is going to increase your visibility within the library. So a few ideas. Now, as I say, I'm not going to bombard you with ideas. You've probably got lots of ideas of your own. There's lots of ideas out there. But I just wanted to, maybe select a few and present them to you. So you probably already do reading in your library lessons. So just make sure it's focused on reading for pleasure. So that means no class sets, because that's not your student choice, is it? And there's going to be at least one person, if not more, that doesn't like the book. So let students read what they want, let them read anything and push it as reading for pleasure. You can announce, right, we're going to finish the lesson with 10 minutes reading, reading for pleasure, because it's part of the National Year of Reading. Just push the point all the time. Every opportunity you've got, mention what you're doing as National Year of Reading, right? I used to have an English teacher. I only had her for one lesson every 2 weeks, fortunately. But she used to curate what the students read in the library. This was meant to be their choice. But she would go round and she'd look at what they were reading and she would change it if she felt it wasn't suitable. So, for example, if she felt it was too easy for them and not literary enough for the top reading set. Um, and I could see that, she'd make them go back to the shelves to change the book, and I could see their shoulders slump. They wanted to read the book of their choice, not what the teacher thought was suitable. So I'd sort of say, oh, I'll give you a hand. Let's go and find something you might like to read. And I'd say to them sort of quietly, I'll take the book and then you can come and borrow it later at the end of the lesson or at break time. So they could actually then at least take away the book they wanted to read rather than the one that they were forced to read. And I have to say, most of the time when they were forced to choose a different book, they never borrowed that book. That went back on the shelf. So it was a bit pointless in making them change it, really. Um, and I always think about, when I think about student choice and let them read what they want to read, and maybe if it's not, too easy for them, I always think about, what about comfort reads? Adults are always reading their favourite book, aren't they? Rereading their books all the time. I rarely reread books, but I know a lot of adults reread their favourite books around Christmas time. They say, oh, I'm reading my favourite book. I read this every year, Sense and Sensibility. So why aren't students allowed to do this? Why don't we let our students reread their favourite books? Now, I know some of them get hooked into one series, and we do want to move them on, because it's good to encourage wider reading and to improve their reading skills. But they go through times of stress at home. They have exams they have to deal with. They have times of their life when they struggle, and they want to read for comfort like the rest of us. Okay, so yeah, I'm a great one for, if you're going to do reading for pleasure, you don't force them to read something that you think is the right reading level for them. The other thing to think about is, do you have any subject lessons booked into the library, and can you add some reading time onto, into this? Can you get the teachers to allow 5-10 minutes for reading at the end of the lesson? You may meet resistance, I get that, but you could always link that reading with the subject. So maybe reading an extract from a relevant fiction book or a related article from a journal or something. Because we need to get staff on board, all staff on board, with the idea that reading is a whole school responsibility. It shouldn't be just left up to the English department and the library to promote it. We should be pushing reading through every single subject. Now, I know this isn't student choice, okay, but it does open up the idea that other types of reading count. And I think a lot of resistance to what we get for reading for pleasure from students is that we send the message that they should be reading stories. And if they don't like to read stories, that's it. They won't read them. You know, they want to read, you know, information books about what they're interested in. So by linking that reading with the subjects, you are opening that idea up. You're reinforcing that idea that other types of reading count, and that reading for pleasure isn't always about stories, not at all. I mean, I can quite happily sit and look through a cookery book, or you know, painting, thing for painting techniques or whatever. And I've got lots of information books on my bookshelves, and I like reading them, and I get a lot of pleasure out of them. Not always stories, is it? Collect quotes about reading. Now, you probably have some of these around the library, but how about collecting quotes? Maybe you could do generic quotes from students and staff. Put them on, rather than display them all around the library, shove them on a display on a wall or board all together. Put the Reading for Pleasure logo in the middle, huge big logo, and then put the quotes around it. Now, School Libraries Group, if you're on LinkedIn, we are doing, for the National Year of Reading, we're doing a quote a week, and it's quotes from students and staff. So do have a look at what we've got on there. And if anybody's listening to this, watching this, that sent me in quotes, thank you very much. That's brilliant. Um, you could also maybe, a reading for pleasure notice board with book recommendations from you and the students and the staff. Again, brand it as National Year of Reading. I can't emphasise this enough, okay? And if you can, put these near the entrance so anyone who walks past the library and looks in sees the National Year of Reading logo, and links National Year of Reading with the school library. That's what you want to happen, okay? One sentence book reviews, these are really easy to collect. One sentence book review. Or the other thing is you do emoji book reviews. Now it'll probably take me longer to work out an emoji book review than it would a one sentence book review. But I should imagine your student librarians would probably quite enjoy doing that. So you just do your front cover of the book and a few emojis to illustrate what the book's about. So, if it's a horror book, you could do a ghost thing or something. So, and I did think if you've probably already got a calendar for regular displays in the library that time with national weeks or seasonal things. You're probably doing, romance or relationship books for Valentine's Day. Most of us do horror book display, don't we, for Halloween? Link these with the National Year of Reading and do a book challenge with them. So just say to students, right, you've got a National Year of Reading book challenge. You need to read one book from each display each month. Now, if you're lucky and have lots of displays around the library, you might only want to say, right, we've got 3, 4 displays. You only have to choose one book from one display, not one from each of them, unless they want to. But that's quite an easy book challenge to do that links with your displays, and it sort of broadens their reading as well, doesn't it? So just a few ideas. Now, I wanted to put some website links up. So you've probably already got some you go to, but these are some that I've mentioned. So the first one's Lucas Maxwell. So if you don't subscribe to it, do go on and subscribe, because he has some amazing ideas for activities that he does with these students, and they're tried and tested. They're done in the school library, they're successful, so tried and tested. Reboot Education is organised by month, activity, things that happen each month. Lots of ideas for displays there. It's a really good resource because it's got information about the event, and these are like weeks or days or months, like Pride Month and things like that. So information about the event and ideas for how to introduce it if you want to. And it's also got the links to the other organisations that are involved in the event. So that link will lead you most of the time to downloadable resources. I've got 2 sources of quotes from books, and about books and reading. The first one is more from books, and it's aimed at primary, but you can use a lot of them in secondary schools. And the second one is more from authors and well-known people. And what I really like about it, one of the quotes actually, and I love this because Lucas has used this, is a quote from Stephen King, and he actually says, this is Stephen King, he says, books are a uniquely portable magic. So, Lucas Maxwell has done the portable magic dispenser. So maybe you'll find a quote that you can link for, use to call your newsletter would be fantastic. And then the last one is the Open University Reading for Pleasure practice in secondary schools. It's a big website. You're likely to get lost a bit on there, but there's lots and lots of ideas of things to use. Okay. So let's move on to the next step in this framework. Embed, which is basically making reading explicit. So library lessons allow us to create a protected space that legitimizes reading for pleasure. We don't get many other spaces in the school that do that. They're all teaching the curriculum, but we can do that in our school libraries. And it's a space also where reading doesn't have to be justified through assessment. If you don't have any library lessons, and I cannot understand what schools that do not have regular library lessons, but if you don't have them, this is an opportunity. This year is an opportunity for you to open up that conversation, because in order to read, students need books or reading material. Doesn't have to be books, does it? It could be magazines, comics, graphic novels, whatever, but they need that reading material. And they need access to that reading material, so the library needs to be open when they can use it. And they also need time, time to browse, to choose, and to then select a book to read. Now, I know a lot of schools' argument is, oh, well, it's open at lunch times, go at break times. That doesn't really work, does it really? I mean, I don't know what it's like in your schools, but my school used to have 25 minutes for lunch and break. It was busy, manic. There was no time. I mean, students did come in and browse and choose, but they were the readers that came in. Most of the time students they want to go and get something to eat. They go and queue up in the canteen to get food. They might, well, they need to go to the toilet. They might want to go and see a teacher. They want to catch up with their friends. They might just want to go outside and get some fresh air, kick a football around, just to have a break from sitting in a classroom for hours beforehand. So the argument that, oh, the library's open at break and lunch times, students come then. No, it doesn't. There's no real time to browse or to choose, is there? If you're, as readers, we know what browsing's like, and it's not a rushed activity, is it? You need, you pick up books, you put them down, you go back to something you saw that might be interesting. There are two other things as well that I've not added here that I think is important. I've actually written a blog based on this, but the other two things are choice, and that's where your collection comes in, obviously, and guidance, and the guidance comes from you. That's where your expertise comes in. You know your students, you know your stock. So to me, that if you want students to read, you need 5 things in place. The books, access, time, plus choice and guidance. So now, today's world, I know we have a huge amount of demand on our time. It's not just us students, I think we've all got demands on our time. Everything seems to take twice as long. If I want to do something online that was before I could just log on and do it, I now have to do password, verify who I am. I get a notification on my phone. I then have to put that into my computer, and I think, oh, 10 minutes later, I've managed to get online, and all I want to order is something simple, like some more writing paper or something, or printer paper or whatever. Everything seems to take twice as long. There's also all these other distractions, and most of which give us instant gratification. What these other distractions do is they give us a connection with others. So I'm thinking about video games here. I think you no longer tend to just sit and play video games on your own. You link with others and play with others online. TV series. People watch popular TV series, and then students will come in and talk about it the next day. They'll be, oh, did you see so and so last night? Did you see whatever the latest celebrity episode was about? How do I talk about it? Books don't have that same sort of urgency, do they? Unless I don't even think, wouldn't even say book groups come in and say, oh, did you carry on reading our book last night? And if everyone's reading something different, you're not going to get that sort of conversation or that social element at all. So, whilst the argument is that students can read at home, they can do, but they're not. We all know they're not reading at home because this is why we're in this situation with these low literacy levels, with this drop in reading for pleasure, and why we have this initiative. Children and young people, and adults, a lot of adults as well, they've got out of the habit of reading. So we have to help our students develop that habit again. It's really important that we do that. And the way you develop a habit is by doing something regularly, so it becomes automatic. You wouldn't say brushing your teeth's a habit, but you do it every single day, every single night. You don't even think about it. And it's the same thing with everything. If you want to build a habit into your life, you have to do it regularly. Okay. And we can help them do that by embedding reading into the school day. Now, embedding reading means it happens every time, not occasionally. Reading has to be planned. It's not used as that filler activity like I mentioned before. Oh, the lesson's finished early. Oh, we've got 5 minutes left. I've mistimed this. Let's get our books out and read. And this, I think, is why some schools say, oh, you should always have a book to read with you, so that just in case the lesson finishes early, so they've got something to do. What message is that sending our students? Oh, reading's not important. We'll just fill it in if we've got time. So reading needs to be planned throughout the school day, okay? And reading, once you've taught a child how to read, um, it's a skill, and the skill needs every skill needs practice, because the more you read, the better they'll get. Now, I know personally that after I've had a period of reading children's books, I read all sorts of different books, but if I've had a period of reading children's books, and magazines, and I've been browsing websites, it really takes me quite a bit of effort to settle down to something more literary or academic. If I need to switch from, I've been reading, middle grade fiction books, and I then need to start reading more academic and research reports for doing notes and writing. I find the best thing to do is I take everything downstairs away from all the screens I've got upstairs, because it's just too much of a distraction, and I need to focus and concentrate to get back into the swing of reading at that level again, and sustained reading for a period of time, because my brain has got used to that lighter, shorter read, which requires less concentration. So if we want, in this National Year of Reading, to create students who read for pleasure, this is what we have to do. We have to build up that reading stamina. We have to start little and often and little and often. Like, I suppose, running a marathon. You don't go out and go training, run 26 miles. It's 0 to 5K, not that I've ever done it, but you start small and you build up and build up until you're running the distance you want to run. Okay. The same for reading. Okay. Once we start doing that, once we start building up that reading stamina, so children and young people can sit and read and stop thinking about distractions, and then reading for pleasure will become lifelong and sustainable. Okay. Now, one of the important aspects of this is self-satisfaction, that they need to see themselves, recognition within the pages. Now, I think there's three aspects to this, right? So, one is that recognizing yourself as a person. So, for example, if you've got Asian girls in your school, then they're likely to want to read books with Asian girl characters. If you've got somebody who comes from a large family and they're the eldest, they might want to read a book that's about story about a large family, and the main character is the eldest. The other aspect is they might not be bothered about the person, but it's the circumstances they identify with. So the storyline, it could be, I don't know, somebody wants to play for the school football team, and the story is all about them trying out and not getting on, and eventually they're successful, Or, and I think personally, this is probably one of the most important aspects, and I think what people connect with more is the emotions of a story. you know, the sadness, the grief, loneliness, escape, success. I mean, the previous one, the football thing, would be success, so there is an overlap. But I think sometimes people connect more with the emotions that they get in a story than with the character or the circumstances, because otherwise, how would you explain somebody um, getting so tied up with these magical lands, populated by mythical creatures, and they're identifying with dragons because they're not identifying with that as a person or the circumstances. It's totally outside their it's in their imagination. So I think it's the emotions that people that tick a lot of boxes for people. If you do get that connection, if you're really lucky and you can find the book that connects with that student, then that reading will become personal to them. It'll be totally relevant. And this is really what we're trying to do when we promote Reading for Pleasure, to find that personal connection. So the National Year of Reading will gives Reading for Pleasure status within your library lessons. So make sure it's explicit and intentional and unapologetic. Do not apologize for wanting your students to read, for wanting them to sit down and make those personal connections with books. Okay. This doesn't mean silent reading every lesson or extra planning or paperwork or turning reading into assessments, because we want students to come to expect that reading happens and matters in the library, and to see reading as a personal activity, not performative. Right. I said there's three aspects about connecting with books, but we need to make reading human, right? We need to make it part of our psyche, if you like, not just for studying. We need to link reading with our students' lives so that it really matters to them. And we can build on these three aspects in the library with activities, right? I should imagine most of you are doing these, but if not, this is probably a good place to start. If you're not doing these type of activities, then this is a good place to start if you want to do something new for the National Year of Reading. Now, these aren't really reading. This isn't sitting down and reading books. So you might have people saying, well, what's this got to do with reading for pleasure? But these are really important aspects of finding out what your students are like and what they like to read or don't like to read, what they're like as readers, and finding out, sort of teaching them how to choose books and having book conversations. Really important, these three aspects. So, reader identity are activities that help them learn about themselves as a reader. So, like I said, what have they read that they actually liked? More importantly, I think they need to know what they've read they don't like. Because if they don't like a book that is time slip and jumps around and they get confused, then they need to know that and not pick up any books that have got time slip storylines. Okay. And these are the sort of things you can do here. These are like surveys and quizzes and things like that to get them to think about what they're like as a reader. Now, what you're doing here is you're giving students language to talk about themselves as readers, and this is really powerful, especially for those who see themselves as non-readers, or if reading is something they think they failed at. Because the message we need to get across to them is there's no such thing as a non-reader. They all read. They think they're non-readers, but when students say, "Oh, I don't read, miss," what they really mean is they don't read the books that they think you want them to read. They think, oh, everybody, my English teacher wants me to read these boring novels. I'm not a reader, I don't read them. They are reading. The majority of students are reading in their lives. And they play video games, and there's all this stuff on the screen that they need to read and understand to play the game properly. But they don't connect that with reading, you see. So we need to make sure we make those connections, okay? Choice and browsing. Now, we need to teach them, and this seems crazy, doesn't it? If you're a reader, that you wouldn't have any problem going into a bookshop or a library and browsing and choosing something to read. My problem is not choosing too many books, because I always come back with too many books to read. But so many students don't know how to browse and choose something to read. And I'm not talking about grabbing a book from the shelf. I'm talking choosing something that they think they might like to read and enjoy. I think sometimes they're just swamped with choice. If they don't know how to choose a book, they're swamped with the number of books we have in our library. And this is where displays can really help because it narrows that choice down for them. Um, I mean, I used to have a lesson where I talked about covers to them, and I'd show lots of examples. And I'd say to them, look, if you don't like horror books, then don't choose a book that has letters in dripping blood on the cover, because that's going to be a horror book. Right? If you want something funny, then look for a cover that's got cartoony drawings on. That's more likely to be a funny book, than something that's dark and menacing. Okay, because this is actually teaching them visual literacy. Identifying the signs on a book cover is an aspect of visual literacy. So, and we can teach them that. So, um, and the other thing I find is that so many of them, they'll pick up a book, there'll be something that drew them to the cover. I mean, to be honest, it's what draws most of us, unless it's an author we know and we like, or unless it's an intriguing title. The majority of us are drawn to a book by its cover because that's the first thing we see, isn't it? There's nothing else. If it's a book you know nothing about, the first thing you're going to see is a cover. So make your decision on whether you like the cover or not. But how many students pick up a book, look at it and put it down? They don't even read the blurb. Now, something attracted them to the cover. So we need to instill that, cover, blurb, start. We need to try and instill that into them. If we pick up a book, at least read the blurb and see what the book's about. And then if you're still intrigued, still sounds interesting, read the start. In cover, blurb, start. Okay. Now, the sort of things you can do, activities, are like the book tasting activities because this opens them up to exploring books. So talking about books, reading starts to them. I used to do this quite a lot because it always resulted in loans, and I found it was a good way to get older stock being read again. You can introduce them to different genres, doing that sort of like a batch of covers and doing the what's the best cover, what's the best blurb exercise. Okay, but don't limit yourself to genres. Think about moods of books. How about a pile of books that books to make you laugh or books to make you cry? They do seem to like those, don't they? I've had students say, Miss, have you got a book that will make me cry? Think, oh, right, okay. So, so, so the idea is to get students to look at as many books as possible, to see possibilities. Maybe if they're lucky, they'll find something that connects. But it won't happen unless they get that exposure to books. But when you do these activities, when you're doing the book tasting activities, again, brand them as National Year of Reading activities, because this is tied up with reading for pleasure. This is the ultimate aim of all these. And the third thing I've got here is reading conversations. Now, we need to make reading sociable. Because friendships are really important to this age group, aren't they? They're desperate to belong. They want to connect. They want to feel they've found their tribe. And it changes. It changes every term sometimes. So have those conversations around books and reading. Let them chat to each other about books, books they like. You could do speed book dating, which is really noisy but great fun. And if you're not sure how to do it, just Google speed book dating and you'll get lots of suggestions. Um, you want basically for choice, it's their choice and it's essential. It's not a reward. They don't get to choose their reading for pleasure book after they finish the boring class read. Okay, we need to validate enjoyment and curiosity about books, and doing this will increase their motivation. Now, I put a link up there to Daniel Pennack's Rights of the Reader. It's available as a book, but you can also download it as a poster, and it's a brilliant poster to put up in your library. There's 10 rights. I'm assuming most of you have seen it, but if you haven't, do have a look, because there's 10 rights of the reader, and each of these is a brilliant starting point for discussion about books. Okay, because I think a lot of students don't have, well, they'll pick something up. Well, hang on. They'll pick something up that they might want to read, but they're a bit wary of being forced to read it. And I'm going to think back to that English teacher again. But a lot of them don't have confidence to choose something they might like. because they feel they have to finish the book. If they pick up a book, they have to finish it. Now, I never ever said to them in my library, you have to stop reading this. But some of them have this mindset that if they pick up a book and start to read it, they have to finish it. And some adults are the same. I have to admit, I was a bit like that. Years ago, if I picked up a book, started reading it, I would just carry on to the bitter end, even if I wasn't enjoying it. I don't do that anymore. There's too many books out there I want to read for me to read something that is just not connecting with me. The only time I'll do it is if it's like a book group book, or it's on a book award list and I have to read it. Um, but we need to get that message across to our students that they don't have to finish every book. And that's one of the rights on that poster of Daniel Pennack's Rights of the Reader. You have the right to stop reading a book if you don't like it. Okay. I used to do I did a simple activity that links with reader identity and those conversations, and I would have about 10 questions about reading that I'd give out as the class came into random students. I mean, you know, the students that don't like to talk out loud in class, so you make sure you choose the right students. And then I say to the class, who's got a question? And then I pick somebody who put their hand up, and I'd ask them to read it out, and then I'd say, right, can you put your hands up? And if you agree with the question, and then I'd follow up with discussion. So, for example, one of the questions would be, can you read when something's happening around you? So who can read when things are going on around you? And it's interesting, if you do this, there's not many put their hands up actually. And then I talk about me as a reader because as a role model and I can switch off and read. And then I'd go on to say, well, this is why we ask you when we reading in our lessons, we ask you to read in silence, to be quiet so that you're not disturbing the people that need it quiet to read. You know, that some of you can read when anything's going on around you, but some people need it quiet, sort of thing. And I'd also, another question would be, can you read more than one book at a time? And again, not many can. And I used to think this is quite interesting because if they can only really focus on one story at a time, how do they manage to read their English class sets and then we also expect them to have a book for reading for pleasure for their own reading? So yeah, I don't think anybody's really thought that through. So, but I can read lots of books at a time. But yeah, if you can only read one book at a time and you're reading a book in your English lesson, you're not going to pick another book up to read until you've finished it, are you? So so if you think about it, there's lots of questions around books and reading that you can use as a basis for a nice lesson about reading conversations and get discussion going. And as I say, it helps them to think about themselves as readers, you know, how they read, why they read, where they read, do they read in bed before they go to sleep? That's a good one because you can bring in the benefits of reading and switching off before you go to sleep. Next step, how am I doing for time? Let's move on a bit. Now, connect. This involves you supporting and enriching the curriculum by linking it with reading for pleasure. You're spreading your influence sideways. You do not have to do this. If you've only got time for the previous activities, that's enough. Like I said, do what you can do with what you've got with your circumstances. And this really does depend on support from teachers. Sometimes you have to accept that you're not going to get any, you know, and just work with those one or two departments that seem to be amenable to using the library. Now, what you're looking here is you're looking you're not looking for asking teachers to run initiatives for you, or you do not want to add to their workload. You're offering something useful, something quick, a low effort for departments, because if it feels like just one more thing to them, it's going to fail. If it feels like you're supporting them and enriching the curriculum, you're more likely to have success. I should imagine many of you already work with certain departments, and this is totally different in every school. Don't really know why, but it is. Every single school I've worked in has been different departments wanting to work with the library. But if you don't, then the National Year of Reading is an ideal opportunity to reach out using that language, you know, the reading for pleasure, enriching the curriculum, you know, reading around the subject. Remember, though, that teachers are probably also feeling overwhelmed. They will know about this initiative and wondering how they can link with it. And if they're not teachers that have really engaged with reading at all, they won't have a clue. They're thinking, what am I going to do? So if you can come up with some ideas for them, you're helping them and you, okay? And working together positions the library as a curriculum partner, which is quite important. So look for easy wins, okay? Short reading list for by topic or theme, so they can sit alongside the curriculum text. I suspect a lot of you do this. So, but make sure you include fiction and non-fiction, not textbooks, not at all. Okay, so you could do history set in specific periods, Romans or World War One. Do climate fiction that could be linked with environmental science or geography. Do departmental shout outs. Ask each department if there's one book, just one, this might be a challenge for them, they could recommend that students might enjoy, or are there any novels they love that are related to their subject? You don't need a lot of suggestions. You don't need a lot of response from this. All you need are half a dozen suggestions back. You can make that into a poster with your National Year of Reading logo, or put that in a newsletter. And once you start doing that, you've got six book suggestions from departments. Other staff are going to want to join in. I've always noticed that once you start doing this stuff with staff and you put their names and departments on posters around the place, other staff come along and don't want to be left out. And if you link it with National Year of Reading, they certainly won't want to be left out. They'll want to join in with it. Okay. So displays, make the displays do the work. Things like, if you like geography, try these books, science through fiction and linking with topics they're studying. Use the books on display to generate your list. I mean, you might be doing it the other way around, generating a list from your catalogue and then pulling those off and putting them on display. But you've got two things there now. You've got a list and you've got display with the National Year of Reading logo on, of course. Shouldn't have to mention that. Borrow the department voice. And I'm sure we've all done this as well. Mr. Smith recommends XYZ book, or do the staff photos with books. It's a little bit of extra work, but it's quite easy to do. And the nice thing about this is staff feel valued, not burdened. And it's interesting because students tend to trust their subject teachers. If they see a teacher's recommended a book to read or something, they're more likely to pick it up and read it. Okay, you could ask for a short quote about the recommended book. And what I will say is seek them out. I used to go out. I used to look at my office staff were really good because I'd say, I need to speak to Mr. Smith. When is he free? So I knew when he'd be in his office, departmental office. So they tell me when he's free on the timetable. So I'd nip over quickly and say, can I have a quote about your recommended book? And I'd write it down. Emails will not work. You're unlikely to get responses. It's like that, just another thing to do, isn't it? So try and seek them out and ask them. Carry a book around, carry a notebook around with you all the time, and then just jot it down in your notebook. So you're doing the work for them. You're producing the posters. You're typing up their quotes that they've given you. Okay. Your lists and displays, make sure you choose the right time to promote them. If they're not going to be doing, I don't know, volcanoes or disasters until the summer term, it's not much point putting that display on sending them that book list in September because nobody's going to be interested in it. So make sure you know what topics are being studied in the curriculum, because our role is to curate and promote our resources, and it works best if we can choose the right time to do it. Okay, this aligns the library with the national curriculum. It also supports literacy without assessment and positions the library as a strategic partner. And the good thing is that it will raise the profile of both the library and the department, um, which is great. So when you do your list and your displays, label them in collaboration with whatever department it is, and that National Year of Reading logo. And then take photos of your displays and share them with your senior management team, because this is brownie points for the department as well as you. This is showing, the library supporting teaching and learning in the curriculum, helping teachers. You're becoming, a part of the integral part of the school. You're not just a sort of separate room stuck on where people go and read. Okay. Now remember, you do not need the whole school buy-in to do this. You just want one department and build it from there. That's all you need to do. Okay. And if you're already doing this, rebadge it. Rebadge it as the National Year of Reading, and then think how you can promote it to the rest of the school, how you can share what you do. Now, I've given you some book lists there. You've probably got book lists that you go to already, but I thought I'd put a few on. But books for topics, they go Key Stage 1 to Key Stage 3. School reading list will go up to Key Stage 5, which is really good because there's not a lot of places that do reading list for older students, are they? There are a lot of them focus on the primary and Key Stage 3, so it's quite good to have that. The Centre for Literacy and Primary Education goes from early years to Key Stage 3, and the Scottish Book Trust it goes up to 18 as well. So, and don't forget, if you've got a regular book supplier, then check their website as well because they're likely to have book lists. So Peters, for example, I know they do primary and secondary. Now, as well as curriculum subjects, these book lists will cover genres, they cover national events, all sorts of wonderful lists. I came across one, I think it was on CLP website, was Fearless Females in Fantasy, which I thought, oh, that would be quite a good display. So, and I need to also mention here organisations, okay, the Empathy Lab, Reading Agency, Book Trust, they've all got curated book lists, okay. Now, if you want to extend this framework, and remember this is your choice, then it's whole school focus. And what it is the library is leading the whole school activities, but it should be shared ownership with the rest of the school. It won't work unless you get buy-in. You will struggle, okay? But I want you to remember, if you do struggle, if you're not getting a lot of response from the school, you want to do a whole school activity and you're hardly getting any response, it's not you, it's them. You know, you're the one with the enthusiasm, you're the one trying to get it off the ground and nobody's interested, it's them, okay? Some of the activities I've mentioned doing with departments could be extended to the whole school. What I will say though is make sure you include non-teaching staff and governors. Some of the best responses I've ever had have been from the kitchen staff. And I think it's because nobody ever thinks of them and asks them to get involved in things, okay? Another thing you might like to do, if you want a whole school thing that's not going to take a lot of time, but will get all your tutor groups involved, is ask each tutor group to recommend one book for a display, just one book. Now, I suspect that your tutors may not be very happy with this because it's probably going to lead to a lot of discussion and arguments amongst the tutor group as to which book is going to be recommended. But hey, that's great. That's what we want them to do. Start talking about books that they like and enjoy and why they're good and why they're not. And if they really can't choose one book, you could always sort of maybe do it to 2 or 3. But I think maybe challenge them and say you've only allowed to choose one book, okay? And don't forget parents, right? Ask your parents for book recommendations. Give them family reading suggestions, you know, via newsletters. Give them books they can read together. Maybe do an online dads and lads reading group or something. The outcome here you're looking for is for reading to become visible. Again, everything's about visibility, normal and valued, because this is how reading cultures grow. If once reading becomes visible, normal, valued, you're building that reading culture and that reading for pleasure. Okay. The important thing though is to avoid overload. Do not try and do too much too soon. So you might decide to just do one display for each subject rather than for every topic. So it's like that, or one list linking to the subject rather than like one whole history list instead of, you know, split it up into different periods. Now, not many people have picked this up actually, which is interesting, but the National Year of Reading documentation identifies 3 priority groups. Right, and everybody's been pumping out stuff for the National Year of Reading as though it's just a big, huge group, and oh, these resources you can just throw them at the students for National Year of Reading. Now, yes, it aims to improve reading engagement for everyone, up to from all children and young people up to 18. But it did identify these three priority groups because these show the steepest declines in reading for pleasure. So what you could do if you really wanted to do something, if you're doing lots of activities around reading for pleasure anyway, and you just rebrand them and you want to do something different, something new to connect with the National Year of Reading, but you don't want to do something that's similar to what you're doing. You think, well, I'm doing a lot of this stuff already. Think about one of these priority groups and how you can link with them. So the first one was boys aged 10 to 16 years. Because the research that was done, National Literacy Trust, I think it was research last year, showed that only 25% of this group enjoy reading for pleasure compared to 39% of girls. And this is why they're a priority group. So if you've got boys aged 10 to 16 as part of your school community, you may just want to target your extra activities, your extra work at them. And this could actually be a useful argument for using that additional funding that we're due to get. If you've got, if you do some research in advance, you do a stock audit of what books, what resources you've got in that might attract them, what activities you could put on to focus on this priority group, then that may be a way. If you think you're not going to get that money, you could say, right, when the National Year of Reading has identified this, okay. The other group, the second group, was parents of young children under 5, and the idea is to focus on the early years to build the foundation of reading. So if you've got parents, I mean, most schools will have parents with children under 5, so maybe you could reach out to them. So if you don't have a local library, can you hold things like story time sessions in your library one day after school, once a week after school or something? And the third group are families from disadvantaged communities. Now, you need to know the demographics of your school community for this, but maybe you want to do activities that focus on this group. And the aim here for the National Year of Reading, the aim here is to break that link between their background and achievement. And it's also to support literacy and well-being in these communities. So this is quite important, I think, when you're thinking about your activities and the National Year of Reading and how you want to engage with it. Now, I really should put this at the beginning because this is one of the most important aspects. You need to show impact. Okay? You need to think about what evidence you want to collect in advance and what impact you want to show at the end of the year. I'm not talking about spreadsheets and pages of data. They play a role, but you also need those personal stories to back up those statistics. So you're looking at quantitative evidence, which is your book loans, as a result of your activities, but also that qualitative evidence, your comments and anecdotes. So, ask students if they found a list useful, ask staff if anyone borrows something from a display, ask if they enjoyed the book when they brought it back, ask them why did they borrow it, would they like more suggestions of similar things. I've already said about carrying an A5 notebook around with you. And so when you're asking students comments, jot it down, okay? Because you will not remember what was said and what happened, especially if you're going to take an overview, at the end of the year and you want to put a report together about what you did for the National Year of Reading. And you won't really know what evidence is most impactful until you have that overview. So just jot it down in a book, okay? Because trust me, you will forget. It's so easy, okay? And other things mean, photos of displays and activities. You can use your professional judgment and look at borrowing trends. Are more students browsing? Is there wider reading going on? Are they sharing books more? I mean, this is the sort of thing we notice anyway, isn't it? So if you are noticing it, if you're noticing when it comes to choosing books in a library lesson and you've got students sharing what they're reading with each other a lot more than they used to, make a note of that, make a note of the lesson and just your observations, because that's evidence, okay? And this evidence will actually sustain your reading beyond this year. It's an opportunity for you to demonstrate the difference you make and the impact the library has. And people are listening this year. They will be listening at the end of the year. They will want to know what's happened. National Year of Reading in libraries, so take advantage of it. And what I will say is that evidence, or you can use it for your senior management team, for in your reports. You use it for inspections and you use it for advocacy. So basically, you need to choose what your next steps are. You don't need a program or a new initiative. You start small. And most of this, as I said, you're probably already doing to some extent. So think about what existing activity could you reframe as National Year of Reading and make visible to students and staff. So you might just do one activity and then you've connected. Might want to extend one element such as adding student voice to an existing activity. Embed that book conversation into a library lesson. So after you've done your 15 minutes of reading, you can say, right, it's a National Year of Reading. Can 3 people share what they're reading, why they chose it, and if they're enjoying it? But you've said it's the National Year of Reading. It's raising that profile again. Talk to one department and ask for a book recommendation. And think about, what is one piece of evidence you could capture this term? Maybe just student quotes or a short reflection on a lesson. What I want you to remember, right, really important, you're not behind because everyone else has lots of National Year of Reading activities organised and you haven't, because they haven't. They're using the activities they've always done. You can only work according to your individual circumstances, so don't measure yourself against others. You're also not failing because you've not had the time or capacity to come up with new ideas. You're not expected to. You're already doing Reading for Pleasure as part of your job every day. Okay, and you are actually leading in this initiative. Right? Us school librarians, we've been doing this for years. We've got the experience, we've got the knowledge. We work with books and students, and we link them together as an integral part of our role. And we do this day in, day out. Now, the National Year of Reading is 1 year, as I said. You're not meant to do everything in the first month. And if it all happens now, how are you going to keep that impetus going? If you've had a look at this website, which I put up there, you would have noticed, I don't know if you'd have to scroll down, but it actually splits the National Year of Reading into 3 terms. It actually does this, and it suggests in the first term you do classroom facing activities, and I assume that means in school libraries as well. The summer term, they talk about growing the whole school culture, and in the autumn term they talk about taking reading beyond the school gates into families and collaborating with organisations. So if you want to think, right, okay, I want to do one activity this term, one next term, one in the autumn term, then do your classroom activity this term, your whole school activity summer, and then involve your parents in the autumn term, because you'll have a whole new bunch of parents join, all those year 7s, and they're likely to be enthusiastic, aren't they? So yeah, do have a look at that website, because it has also got lots of other resources and things on. Now, this is the last slide, I think, yes. So basically, what I want to finish with is the National Year of Reading will help you name your impact by using shared language and shared goals. And this is a brilliant opportunity. They don't come along very often. So as I say, the third one, but that's in over 30 years. So make the most of it. Okay. Don't stay silent. It will also help you strengthen partnerships, both within your school community, with your teachers, with your senior management, and with parents, and help you get involved if you want to, as this is choice, but with collaborations with outside organisations, maybe your public library, maybe it's the first chance opportunity you'll have to do something with your public library, who knows. And finally, what the National Year of Reading will do is enable you to advocate with confidence, because decision makers are going to be looking at reading for pleasure, the impact that the National Year of Reading has had on reading pleasure in their schools and how it's improved. And you can demonstrate this and the library's role. Okay, So there we go. Thank you very much for listening. And I hope that's been useful. And I hope I've managed to reassure some of you and dampen down that feeling of being overwhelmed. Right, I'm going to check. All right, okay. Is there any questions? I don't know if there's any questions. I don't think
No,
there
there's
is.
no
No,
questions at
that's
all,
good. No,
Barbara.
no, good. Okay, cool. Well, hopefully, people have found that useful. I think you'll be. Oh, that's what new. There'll be. It's going to go out onto our website. So if you didn't get everything, because some of it I had to go through quite quickly, I realised I was running out of time. But it's all going to be on there, so you'll be able to go to those links I put there. And please just go back and rebrand everything. First thing you need to do, rebrand it all as National Year of Reading. You're doing this already. You really are. And we're the experts at it, so we need to make sure everybody knows that. Oh, good. Somebody said they just started last week. Oh, it's scary. Right, yeah, I can imagine if you're new, if you've only just started your job as a school librarian, that's a huge lot to input, isn't it? It takes ages to get to know. I found one of the worst things when I started at a new library was getting to know the stock. Because it's a school, it's always amazes me how stock varies from school to school. And I'd go to the shelf thinking, oh, they'll have a certain book in because surely every school library's got that book, and it wasn't in the library. And it takes a while to get to know what the stock is in your library. And things like that. So, and if you're doing it now and it's a National Year of Reading, then, but yeah, rebrand whatever's happening in the school. You'll have other activities probably that the previous librarian set up. Rebrand them as National Year of Reading. And it isn't cheating, obviously. Please, it's not cheating. Everybody, trust me, everybody's doing this. So, as you said, yes, the stock needs a refresh. Yes, yeah, you probably will. Yeah, it is a best job, brilliant. Oh, thank you very much, Althea. That's lovely. Thanks for your kind words, everyone. Um, yeah, it's yeah, if you're going to you need a stock audit really, but you need to do a audit of your school community first, and then once you've got your demographics of your school community, you can then look at the stock and see where you've got gaps where the school community isn't represented. Yeah, somebody said, will they be sent slides? Are we putting this access to the slides on the website? Do we do that?
Yes, we do, Barbara. So
Okay, yeah, that's
I'll
good.
implement it into the website page, and there will be a
Oh,
download
cool.
or convert it
Okay.
to PDF. Okay.
Yeah, that's cool. Brilliant. Right. Well, it is exciting times, because I've been talking to people, and whoever I talk to, and I talk to lots of different people, they know about the National Year of Reading, even those that aren't really involved with libraries and books. So it's our opportunity to shine, I think. So look at it and that. We will gather impact and we show the difference we make and we'll shine.